Good evening, everyone. It is 7 p.m. in NYC and 4 p.m. in the Napa Valley. I'm Sam Kimball from New York Wine Events. Thank you for joining us on virtual day trip to wine country. We are here for a place for true small production wines. We're going to the storied Napa Valley in California, 1 mile south of Yountville in sort of the central northern part of the valley. And you might ask, what are we doing? What is our theme tonight? Our theme is simple. It is Napa-centric wines in a sense of place, and also great value wines from a winemaker who's achieved 23 100-point rated wines in his career, 23 and counting. And all I can say to that is, wow. There are very, very few winemakers who can claim that achievement, and we're going to be reviewing and talking about wines that come out of a winery with that winemaker. We're going to be visiting virtually with Elyse Winery in the Napa Valley. The quick background is a winery that was founded in 1983, nearly 40 years ago, and acquired recently by a new owner in 2018. And tonight, we have the privilege and the pleasure of hanging with that new owner in this session. Here are a few key stats about Elyse Winery. They have the best access to ancient vines, grapes, old vine grapes, which, as many of you know, make some of the best wines. They have a 100-point winemaker who's making $35 to $45 in that range, in that price point range, wines. Amazing values for what is such a storied and an amazing wine region. And they make no single wine selection with more than 600 cases produced, which that's our theme. This is a small production wines, tremendous focus and tremendous quality. So there's no mass produced national chain wine brands here that you see, the ones you see in national chain stores. No, sir. No, ma'am. This is really going to be a special session where we talk about some great wines that are super accessible. Welcome one, welcome all. Please ask any questions or make any comments you have in the chat live during the session, and we will answer those questions and comments live on the fly as we go. I see a bunch of people tuning in. Hi, Diane. Great to see you. People all over the country. Oh, yeah, there we have Ohio, Chicago. Awesome, guys. So great to see everyone. We've got a really geographically diverse crew tonight. Happy Wine Wednesday, or Happy Wines Day, Allison. I agree. And NYC, of course. Sonoma, all represented from around the country. So this evening, we're going to travel virtually to Elyse Winery, as I mentioned. It's in Napa Valley, just south of Yountville. And I think it's actually worth taking a look at that on the map where we're headed. And I hope that I am representing it correctly. But if you see in my background here, above my shoulder, that red map pin is the winery. And right just north of that is Yountville. So you're sort of north of the actual town of Napa. And our guest will straighten me out on the geography lesson, but we're right sort of in the heart of Napa Valley. And if I zoomed in, you would see some wineries. If we zoomed in on the Google map, you'd see some wineries that you recognize that are famous, really, really famous Napa Valley wineries. But without further ado, I would like to bring in our guest and introduce Josh Peeples, the owner, the new owner, relatively new, at Elyse Winery, but a veteran and a real star in the wine industry. Welcome, Josh. Thank you so much for being here and coming in from California. It's great to see you.
Well, Sam, thanks for having me. It's great to be able to discuss the wines. Like you said, we've owned the winery for 3 years now. But, you know, like you mentioned, I've been in the wine game since 2000. So it was an amazing opportunity to be able to acquire kind of a legacy property right in the heart of Napa.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about your background. I mean, because you've been in the wine biz for over 20 years. You've done a few things in the business, and I think that they really contributed to your successful transition into owning Elyse now.
Well, I think, I started my first brand in 2002, and then was lucky enough to work with some great winemakers over the years. Kind of started my career, lucky for me, working with John Consgard and working with him in the cellar and scrubbing barrels and kind of learning the industry from the ground up. And then was lucky enough to then work with Luc Morlaix when he left Peter Michael, made wine with him for 8 years, and then started working with Russell back in 2011. So Russell Bevan's the winemaker for all the wines we're going to taste tonight. And he and I, now have 5 different projects together. And that was, kind of an amazing opportunity to now have the ability to make them all under one roof. And that was really kind of, when you stop looking for things, they tend to fall in your lap, so to speak. So that was really the Elyse story. Knowing Ray over the years, the original owner, living in Yountville, seeing him out at dinner all the time, and then, just being at the right place, the right time over a cocktail, making an offhanded joke that, he turned 70. It was time for him to retire. 4 months later, he thought it was the right time. So it was one of those things. I always say, if I ever get invited to give a commencement speech, it's always going to be go to bars more often. That's where all business really happens.
So just to be clear, just to clarify for everybody watching, you were just grabbing a drink at one of your bars that you like to go to occasionally in your area, and there he was, and you knew him for over the years.
Exactly.
And just over a drink at the bar, he decided, you know what? Time to transition. Josh is the right guy. And
that was it. Yeah. So it was literally all sparked by a fun offhanded comment of now that you're 70, aren't you going to retire? I cleaned up the language for any kids in the background, but a 30-minute answer. That was really what sparked it all. And so, of course, like you said, the brand goes back almost 40 years. I was definitely familiar with the brand and, the great wines they'd made from the Morasoli vineyards over the years and some other amazing properties that they had worked with. So, it really was a great opportunity to give the brand a little bit of a reboot, honestly, bringing in Russell as the winemaker and some kind of new energy behind it. I think when you run a business for 40 years, I can only imagine, it's like half my career already. And so with working with Russell, and that kind of goes into our small portfolio of wines, it was perfect to add Elyse into the mix because it really were styles of wine that we had never made in the past. Really Russell isn't known for making Zinfandel all that much. Mm-hmm. So it was a great challenge. And that was really kind of when we put Elyse under contract. I kind of challenged Russell. Well, we know you can make 100-point Oakville cabs, but can you make the greatest $45 in California? And I think he took the challenge and ran with it.
Well, you just encapsulated why I got into the wine business over 15 years ago, which was I became fascinated with really good wine. And somebody introduced me to some great wines, actually from California, and it was actually a Zinfandel. Mm-hmm. And then I started on what has become a lifelong quest to find diamonds in the rough, wines that cost $30 or $35 a bottle, but taste like they cost $135 or $235 a bottle. And they exist, and I think that, your Elyse is a great example. And I agree with Susan, who just put in the chat, Morasoli rocks. I mean,
yeah, I agree.
But Morasoli is not a name. It's not a name like Beringer or Screaming Eagle or, any of the big guns out of Napa Valley. You don't know it unless you're a little bit more acquainted with the wine world. And that's where it gets fun because you find these diamonds in the rough, as I call them.
Absolutely. And I think, to kind of tip my hat back to Ray, the original owner, he had that gift of gab and the ability to have growers sell him fruit on long-term contracts and develop that partnership that, we've been doing ourselves for 20 years, but it was amazing to be able to pick up that baton and run with it and work with the families like the Morasolis or the Ramazzotis that farm part of the Chardonnay that we're going to start with. and some great old Vine Zinfandel. And so you find these growers that really maybe have no interest in ever making their own wine. And it's a different breed. And they definitely, don't get caught up into the marquee kind of glamour celebrity status of Napa Valley. It's, we've been farming for 4 generations. That's what we do.
Yep.
Charge $20, $500. We don't care. We're farmers. Here's what we do. Here's, the product we can give you. And now once you take it, maybe give us a case every year. Fun fact, Gary Morrisoli, 4th generation owning that vineyard in Rutherford, doesn't drink. So you can't wine and dine a guy that doesn't drink. It's one of the most obnoxious things in the wine business is that I can't, open a $300 bottle of wine and wow somebody because he'd rather drink Diet Pepsi. Yeah. And so, those strategy meetings go really different. What can we do to impress this guy? It's just one of those funny kind of grower winemaker relationships in the Valley.
Well, speaking of values and speaking of, fancy and famous wines, I love the fact that your winery and some of your vineyards are literally next door to the famous Screaming Eagle wine brand, which somewhat less famously on our blog on NewYorkWineEvents.com, we have an article that's hugely popular and has been for 4 or 5 years that we wrote a few years ago called the 5 most expensive bottles of wine ever sold. And the number 1 bottle was a Screaming Eagle, which went for $500,000 for 1 bottle.
Yeah, we're much less than that. But we do control about 2 acres of the Tench Vineyard, which is literally 5 feet north. So we share the property line. And again, Russell Bevan, our winemaker, he took a 50-year lease of that estate, about 12 years ago, 13 years ago now. And so with one of our other brands called Addicts, we make the Tench Vineyard Cabernet. But again, we're doing it at a fraction of the cost. And so that's kind of where, a theme we have in our portfolio. And, just to go back and celebrate Morrisoli again, it's 5 feet from Scarecrow's Vineyard. Mm-hmm. So it's, we love to be adjacent to very famous vineyards. And, sometimes being 5 feet, there's a fence post there for a reason. But other times now with our kind of drone footage and sonar maps of vineyards, we can really see the kind of congruent terroir over some of our vineyards. And, it's been a lot of fun. And I think that's, to quote Russell Bevan, he once, we were on a panel discussing Cabernet about 10 years ago. And he's been known to discover vineyards and make them famous. And that was really the question that was posed to him. And his response was, I like to get adjacent to very famous vineyards and make fun of them. And that was his response. So there is a theme of where we like to play and how we kind of weasel our way in. And I think you touched it on the opening remarks. We're making 8 or 10 barrels per wine on average. That's it. Yeah. So when we come in, we can typically negotiate 2 or 3 tons from a famous grower or something adjacent to someone famous, because we're not asking for an ocean of wine. So we kind of come in and maybe then start to creep within that vineyard over years. But our expectation is you give us 2 acres, that's more than enough.
Yep. So to that point, I want to ask, because I'm sure people are curious. I'm curious. We have people watching from all corners of the continental U.S. right now. Mm-hmm. Is all these wines are available through 2100hoffmanlane.com and the shop there and the link that I put in the chat. But are they also distributed? Will you find, for example, the Morrisoli Cabernet Sauvignon at your local retailer if you live in Manhattan or Brooklyn?
Potentially. New York's one of 12 states that we distribute to, but all independent retailers, mostly small restaurants. I think, as you mentioned, we tend to avoid any massive retail chains because we honestly just don't have the supply.
Right.
And that's really it. And so, with micro production, we definitely want to get out there. I think, again, 20 years of doing this, we figured out events like this, having a local sommelier saying, I just tried my favorite new wine that's not going to break the bank. I strongly suggest it. I own the place. I have to tell you blue in the face how great the wines are. But when you get a third party that you trust giving you recommendations, that was really kind of our marketing strategy, but to make sure, we're not too far off the radar.
So how much is a bottle of Screaming Eagle these days, roughly?
Oh, well, mailing list, it's $1,250. Market value is about $3,300.
Right. And how much is a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon made from your Tinch vineyard, which is 5 feet away from the Screaming Eagle?
185. That's our expensive. Yeah, that's our super reserve, 185.
Yeah. Okay. So not cheap, but
not cheap. But
within reach. It's accessible, to average folks who say, you know what, I want a special bottle for when my son or daughter graduates from high school or college, and
correct.
When we have a dinner. Like, that's not crazy. $3,200 is crazy.
That's a trophy celebration wine. And I know you wanted to answer some of the chat questions, kind of live actions. Yes. I noticed one from Steve.
We had a question about designate wines with a certain place.
So what we really like to focus on, especially under the Elyse portfolio, are terroir-driven wines that are, for the most part, site-specific. And so we really love to, for example, the Zinfandel we're going to taste tonight, it's from the Carreras vineyard in Dry Creek. And so these are 90 to 110-year-old dry farmed head prune Zinfandel vineyards that now third generation still farming the same plot. And so we really love, like Morrisoli, like Holbrook Mitchell, another cab we make, which is a vineyard in Yountville, about 1,000 yards away from the winery. I think when you look at our portfolio, we really do like to isolate and highlight specific terroir and often do vineyard designated wines. That being said, Russell's genius is also in blending. And I think that's why if you kind of visit the winery, you'll figure out others have said we make way too many wines. And that's kind of, let's not make one Zinfandel, let's make 5. Let's not make one version of Syrah, let's make 3. It's really been a great exploration of, what is small. We bottled 1 barrel of Viognier from the Jim Rose vineyard. So we ended up with 288 bottles for the vintage. And I think that's actually frustratingly small. 1 barrel is too small, I can tell you from a practical standpoint. But we found, just 1 barrel that was different than the rest, and Russell got excited, so we bottled it. It also kept my fiance happy too, because she thought it was a great idea. So, there's also other external motivations sometimes.
I mean, that's a little over 20 cases. It's nothing.
It's nothing. I think I drank 5 of them, and I think the cellar staff drank 5, and we maybe sold 5. So it was one of those, just why? But that's really what we mean by a sense of place. And I think with that price point, $35 to $45, we get, and I can tell you, we've moved the demographic down by about 20 years for our average client.
Yeah.
Because now, we can send you a 3-pack of old Vine Zinfandel, all 90 to 150-year-old vines for less than $100. So now you can have friends over, have wines that were made literally vine to bottle by a celebrated winemaker, and you get 3 bottles for $100 to share with friends and really see what's the difference between Rutherford, St. Helena, and Dry Creek. And if we can kind of capture that enthusiasm you talked about 15 years ago, I know my epiphany bottle, many, many moons ago, underage drinking with my parents at dinner. I know the wines that kind of made you think one of these things is not like the other. And it kind of makes you want to explore a bit more. And so that's kind of where we love to be that launching pad for people to understand that, Zinfandel is not just Zinfandel. The Chardonnay that you have in your glass is, potentially atypical. And that's kind of the fun part as well. With our kind of collection of wines, we make 6 different Chardonnays, and they're all really different expressions of what Chardonnay can be. And that's one of our favorite kind of challenges when people visit the winery. And, people will claim, I don't like Chardonnay. I was like, well, we're going to spend an hour to tell me which one you don't like. Or, we can at least go back and forth a little bit on style. And so that's been kind of a fun exploration for us as well.
I also love the fact that you mentioned Viognier. I mean, here's a grape that a lot of people have never heard of. We had a great session with Dave Miner at Miner Family Wines.
Yep, absolutely.
He's got a very nice Viognier. And one of my pet, sort of projects or missions in life is to spread the gospel about grapes that, explore grapes you've never had, like wines from grapes that you've never heard of.
Sure.
And people discover a Viognier, and it's magical because that's a fantastic wine. It's terrific for this time of year. goes with lots of different foods. And, you know, it's not just another glass of Chardonnay or Sauvignon Blanc.
Sure. So under the Elyse portfolio, we make a wine that we actually brought back. And that's one of the things I loved about kind of Ray's exploration of varietals, like you said. It's called L'Angenoux, and it's a Roussan Viognier blend. And we bottled, 5 barrels of it, slightly cloudy by design. It's super unfined, unfiltered. And it's just one of those things of taking winemaking philosophies and things, I love to drink, international drinker all the time. So it's been fun to kind of see what can we do. And I think that's where, one of my kind of jobs, if you will, is to manage the talent, and the talent is Russell Bevan. And so that's kind of where, we have to create kind of interest, if you will. Because we're all fundamentally ADD, so it's kind of like squirrel. I'm done. And so we kind of look at, we love Syrah, so now we have 5 different Syrah vineyards, and sometimes was there a big CFO meeting behind it? Not at all. It was, we have access to amazing vineyards that I've had wines that I've loved in the past. So why? Yes is the answer when Russell comes. And I always say when he gets that smile going, I know it's something we probably should pursue.
With that many accolades, hard to ignore that smile.
Sure.
Couple questions, Josh, in the chat. What are the alcohol ranges of your Zins?
The Zinfandels typically are 14.7 to 14.9. And part of that is a function of dealing with 100-plus-year-old vineyards. We can't push them to be 16, 17% alcohol Zinfandels. The vines literally give up and shut down and drop all their leaves. And you kind of think of a grumpy old man sitting there at 100 years old saying, I've worked all the harvests I want to work. Pick me or not, I don't care. I'll be here next year. Yeah. And so I think it's a function of the vines that we source from and the vineyards we're able to control. That's just a function of those sites. Yeah. Oak regime wise, we've moved everything to French oak in the last 3 years. Our Zinfandel program typically gets 50% new French oak, 50% neutral French oak. And that's just kind of something that gives us some play on each site to work backwards or forwards by a few percentages to see what's happening. And, it's one of those things, because we now have 5 kind of what we call ancient vine, which is not legally designated, but the ZAP community, it's definitely something that's getting thrown around more and more. We entered a new SKU. It'll be coming out this fall, simply called Old Vine Zinfandel. And it's a blend of all 5. And that kind of lets us play with what barrels really, maybe because of new oak, lack of new oak, don't make the more solely vineyard designate, but they're still A++. We have a home for them now. So it's a new SKU that'll be coming as well.
You're reminding me that I need to make my flight reservations and tickets for the Zinfandel experience in January.
Yeah, come on. We'll be there. We'll have some fun.
In San Francisco, for anybody watching, you may know about this, but if you don't, it is the Woodstock of California red wine, and Zinfandel specifically happens every January in downtown San Francisco, and it's really, really amazing. So I love Nancy's question. We had Baca Wines on a few weeks ago, and they're doing some interesting things with concrete tanks. Are you steel and then oak where you're doing oak aging, or do you have concrete or cement as well?
So we ferment in stainless steel. Typically, the tanks we built are 3.5 ton fermenters. That tends to be a perfect size for us. We do not age in steel, and we don't use any concrete at all. So I can go down that rabbit hole of what people love about concrete fermenters is that they're porous and they give a great mid-palate texture and richness. Mm-hmm. What I hate about cement is that it's porous because you can't clean it. And we are germaphobes. If you look at our cellar, you can literally eat off the floor. And that's one of the things that Russell preaches of kind of microbial activity in the cellar. Let's control everything we can. And so we just kind of love fermenting in oak. We do that a lot. We age in various sizes of French oak. Mm-hmm. So normal barriques, 225 liters up to 600 liter puncheons. So we love playing around with different varietals. We kind of fallen in love with, the Rhone Valley and Chateauneuf de Pop. So we do a lot of large barrel aging for our Syrah and Grenache. So we take it a lot of different directions. We definitely have a fairly robust R&D budget. And it doesn't always work, I'll tell you that. There's some wines that we've made that no one on this call will ever taste, and there's a reason. Sometimes things go sideways and it looked really good on paper, and you look at yourself 18 months later going, okay, that happened.
Keep those ones at the winery.
Correct.
I agree with Allison. We love winemakers that are germaphobes. So speaking of innovation and technology, I want to share my screen and show everybody the Optical Sorter, which I was sort of fascinated by when I learned about it at Elyse. So this is, if everybody can see it, this is your Optical Sorter. First of all, what is an Optical Sorter and why do you use it?
So the Optical Sorter is something actually developed by Del Monte for the green bean industry, believe it or not. And it's a series of electronic eyes that use 20 air pistons to knock out anything we deem not to be perfect. And so we actually have 12 people on our sorting line. There's a shaking table for cluster sorting with 4 people. Another section for berry sorting with 6 to 8 people. And then the final, if you will, is allowing technology to spit out anything that's not perfect. So we can actually dictate how much perfectly round berries go through, how many raisin berries go through. So we can change this per lot. So the jacks that you'll see there, as we call them, the little pieces of stem that are left after the destemmer and anyone missed it doing the berry by berry, the pistons knock it out. So the great juxtaposition for us, we love to utilize all the technology that's available in the wine business, but I think you have another slide. We still foot stomp all of our red wines.
Yeah, I love this. So I love the juxtaposition of the Optical Sorter with the traveling back in time to Lucille Ball.
And this isn't a staged photo. We do this on every red wine lot possible. And so that's where we love kind of that duality of winemaking. Use every new toy known to man, and then go back and use some ancient, techniques, if you will. So this is a fun thing to do. Again, not scalable. It takes forever. And it's hard to kind of throw people in because we typically pick at night. That bin full of fruits probably at 38 degrees, and we always kind of force feed whomever's doing it champagne. Don't worry, your feet will go numb soon, and then it's fun. So we do that a lot.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So by the way, we have a couple questions,
Sure.
Specifically one related to the stomping, the actual foot stomping. Is there specific footwear or boots or clean boots?
Au naturel. So
just barefoot.
Barefoot, we do sanitize you with grain alcohol. There is a procedure. So again, going back to being germaphobes, no nail polish. There's a bunch of rules that go into it. But we make sure you are sanitized from the thigh down and then get to work. So that's
so Allison would like to know how one would go about getting that job.
Oh, just email me directly. Come on out. Like we love free labor. Like I said, we pay with champagne. And then the other question I saw that popped up, all in for Elyse, we produce about 6,000 cases a year. And again, that's spread among probably 16 different wines on any given vintage. So, it's really not any juggernaut wine that we run after. And most of our wines, whites were in barrel for 14 months. Zens were 18 months. Cabernets typically 20, 22 months. And so we'll end up bottling 4 or 5 times a year based on the flavor. And, we did our early bottling this year for our rosé program under the Elyse. We do a Grenache Syrah Mourvedre provincial kind of rosé. This year, just because we could, and I thought it was something that needed to be done, we actually made white Zinfandel. So
is it dry or is it off dry?
It's off dry. It is an homage to the wine that you drank unofficially in high school that launched your wine consumption career.
And we did it to the late 80s and Ronald Reagan, white Zinfandel.
Absolutely. It's the greatest white Zinfandel ever made. It's technically from Morrisoli, and we made it on purpose. And, that's kind of the tongue-in-cheek approach that we can take sometimes is that, we were all sitting around. We work, 20 hours a day during harvest. And with our associate winemaker, Reed Scupney of Lang & Reed fame, we were sitting there at 2 a.m. And I jokingly asked, when was the last great white Zinfandel you had? And he said, there hasn't ever been one. I said, we're going to make it this year. And that sparked.
Really good too. I mean, I like an off-dry rosé. I mean,
yes.
So Josh, we got a lightning round here. Let's do a few questions, quick answers, lightning round, and then we're going to start tasting wine. So Eddie asked a moment ago, how long do you usually barrel age? I think he was referring to the red wines primarily.
So typically 16 months on the Zinfandel.
Got it. Okay. And you were talking about a wine that isn't totally filtered a moment ago. Is there any regulation regarding filtration in general?
No. So we tend to bottle all of our wines unfined, unfiltered. With that Rhone white, we kept it slightly extra cloudy for texture. So we didn't want to strip it. But no, there's no legal way to go.
And then the question here, which I think we touched on a little earlier, I think it was right before Eddie joined, best places to find your wines, excluding the winery. There is a link which we'll share again in the chat where you can order the wines. It's essentially directly from the winery, but it's a separate entity. And then select retailers in major markets.
Not always major markets, just select retailers. I'm originally born and raised in South Carolina, so we have a disproportionate representation in the Southeast. So it's, you can find our wines in North Carolina easier than you can find them in Chicago. So there's kind of it depends on the market. So Eddie, shoot me a note. I don't know where you're located, but I can tell you a list of restaurants and independent retailers wherever you might be.
If you would drop your email into the chat, Josh, and then people can find out directly. So
all right.
Eddie's in California, so theoretically you have some nearby.
Absolutely. Yeah, we definitely have some small retailers in California that carry the wines.
All right, last lightning round question. White Zin versus red Zin. Is the difference just time of skin exposure or
That's
or
it.
what?
Yes. So it literally for our standard rosé, which is dry, the same thing. So we leave it on skin contact for about 3 hours just to give it kind of that salmony pink color. And then we press it and that's it. So it really is just a skin contact time frame.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, this was in a very short, compressed amount of time, was an education in many things.
Like I said, I'm an open book. Ask me anything. If I don't know it, I'll make it up. So we're pretty good.
I love talking to you about it. So what wines are we tasting today? We have 4, and I think we're starting with the Sonoma County Chardonnay. Yeah.
Correct. So this is a Chardonnay. The first one we were able to kind of make start to finish. Again, as of the 18 vintage, these are all kind of under our regime, as we say. And so we added a vineyard called Steiner at Sonoma Mountain to the portfolio, a vineyard I've worked with in the past, to the Smith vineyard in Dry Creek, which was kind of the backbone of the Chardonnay in the past. And so this gets about 35-40% new French oak. It is barrel fermented. Lots of batonnage. We stir this every 90 days. This spent 14 months in barrel. And then again, 100% malolactic fermentation. So we can bottle it unfined, unfiltered. Maybe a winemaking geeky technical question.
Buttery, does this have the big butter vanilla oak, or is it sort of in the middle?
It's in the middle. It's definitely on a leaner side by design. And going back to, having multiple brands and multiple versions of Chardonnay, this is definitely our leanest, most mineral-driven of our portfolio. And so we love to keep this on that crisper side. Again, 35 to 40% new French oak. It's kind of hard to round up on that one. But that's where we don't want the oak to be the dominant personality of this wine.
This one's got my name written all over it. I love an oak aged Chardonnay. I guess I'm maybe old fashioned or out of step with that. I mean, there's so much It's so in vogue now to be drinking stainless steel fermented Chardonnay, no oak. But
Yeah, I've had that. It's called Sauvignon Blanc.
yeah, exactly.
So, not to comment on anybody else, but we make Sauvignon Blanc too. I love Sauvignon Blanc. I'd much rather drink that than trying to manipulate Chardonnay against what it wants to be. And so I think that's part of our strategy is, don't be too heavy-handed on the winemaking. And I think when we get out of the way, some people call us lazy. I think it really is letting these two sites that are kind of, juxtaposed. It's great to see the Dry Creek Valley being much warmer and much flashier than a cool climate Sonoma Mountain with racy acidity. So that's kind of where we pair those two things together and bring the best of both worlds.
And so quickly, what are the tasting notes on this, and what's your favorite food to pair it with?
Believe it or not, my favorite food is overly salted buttered popcorn. It's my absolute favorite thing to sit and watch a movie and just sip on Chardonnay and eat buttered popcorn. I know it's a really bizarre food and wine pairing, but it matches with.
Not at all.
Yeah, good. But it matches with all of the traditional seafood. Anything from the ocean, this wine loves. And I was luckily just out on the coast in Sea Ranch, and any crab, any shrimp, anything that comes out of the Pacific Ocean, this wine definitely wants to be on the table.
Well, I'm on the East Coast, Josh, so I'm going to have this with a nice lobster roll from Maine.
There you go. We don't get that out here.
All right, so we're going to move on to number 2, which is super interesting to me. I love the name. This is the Nero Misto.
Yes.
2018. So this is a red. This is a red blend, yeah?
Correct. And so the name really is an homage back to really how wines were made in Napa Valley by migrant, new to the U.S., new to Napa Valley. It translates to mixed blacks. And so kind of taking off of the Italian field blend approach, we actually co-ferment this wine. It's one of the riskiest wines we make because we throw all the varietals into one tank, and this wine is what it is. It's the easiest blending session we ever do because the wine is already there. And so
when you say co-ferment, explain that for the pedestrian wine people like me on the
Sure.
call.
And so what we end up doing is taking all the varietals and literally picking them within 48 hours, and they all go through fermentation together in one tank. So there is no unblending. So for this, we have all 3 varietals thrown in together, and we kind of think it should work. So it's kind of a fun way, but it's something that we kind of just continued the tradition that Ray had started of really just doing a throwback to how wines in Napa Valley were made in the 1880s.
So this is a little bit of like the Cracker Jack approach, where there's a surprise at the bottom of the box of Cracker Jacks. Like you, every year, this is going to be sort of distinct from the prior year.
It should be, plus or minus 5%. We don't want to take you, left-hand turn at Albuquerque, but there's definitely a theme to kind of the style of this. But, throwing in Triga Nacional from Spring Mountain, definitely a game changer from Zinfandel Petit Syrah that it was the year before.
Now, so, does this wine make you thirsty or hungry?
Definitely makes me hungry. This is our Cesse Bon, which is our other blend. It's kind of the sister to this, is our almost Beaujolais summer red, light, fruity Grenache Syrah Mourvedre for the most part. This is its bigger brother. So this is definitely what I throw on the table for Thanksgiving. Anything you're going to throw on a grill, backyard barbecues. It is an easy drinking, fun wine, but it loves anything with some char on it. Anything you can, pot roast. Any of the classic big, meaty, hearty comparisons.
So is it medium body or big body?
It's medium bodied. We keep this based on the varietal composition. This could easily be a tannic monster if we let it. Yeah, and that's one of the things that we don't want to push this too much. Honestly, based on the price point, this is something that most people drink within 10 hours of buying it, or 10 minutes, either one. So it's not something that people are going to cellar for 20 years. And we kind of know that. So we kind of build this wine to be that immediate gratification in a good way.
Quick question: the Chardonnay and this Nero Misto, what are the ABV on the alcohol by volume on each of these?
I believe the Chardonnay is 14.3 and Nero Misto is 14.8, but that would be my best guess.
This one's got some kick.
Yeah, so it's a big, beefy, fun, flashy wine, and I think it's one of those that it tends to be, and I always say it's in the best sense of the word, it's an absolute crowd pleaser. And that's where, for any family gatherings, that's why I mentioned Thanksgiving, you have everybody at the table, 14 palates to try to make happy. This is a wine that kind of can go different directions for different people.
I love this sweet spot of a $35 price point, so accessible. And this wine is a delicious complement to almost any gathering or meal. And it's not fussy or formal. And I love that. That, to me, that's one of these diamonds in the rough. And the fact that it's this blend of grapes that get co-fermented, really cool.
Yeah. And I think, when we see Russell, in the cellar making these wines, he takes just as much joy out of making this as, our Tench Cab. It's just a completely different ends of the spectrum. And I think it challenges him as a winemaker in radically different ways. So it's kind of fun to see him get, that excited over this style, because we are high risk, high reward. He keeps saying, "Are you sure we want to co-ferment still? It's easier if we do this." I'm like, let's do it. The wine's always been made that way. So who are we to change it?
And I love like the DNA and how this wine comes into being, because frankly, nothing against hedge fund managers, but your Tinge Cabernet is for the hedge fund managers. That's their everyday bottle. Whereas this is for the other 99% of the population, which just wants to enjoy a great bottle of wine, crank up the grill and cook something and enjoy it.
Absolutely.
So,
and I think that if we're going to go kind of ratchet up and umph and flashiness, would be our dry Creek Zinfandel. That's, a perfect example of taking 90 to 100-year-old vines, working with the Ramazzotti family to farm the Carreras vineyard. All these names get confusing, but that's why we keep it as Dry Creek. It's one of those things of what name should we put on it. We've never been able to decide in the last 3 years, so we've just kept it as Dry Creek. But this is a single vineyard Zinfandel, all from a site called Carreras. And we love working with the Ramazzotti family. They're just, again, I believe, third-generation farmers in Sonoma. And so they really bring a lot of knowledge. And, my career until 2018, I'd never made Zinfandel. And so it was kind of a big learning curve for me. And we ended up just asking a lot of great questions, because we're new to the vineyard, but again, they're third generation farming this dirt. And so it's been a lot of lunches and, well, what if we did this? And they go, we tried that before, it didn't work. Or what if we did that? Oh yeah, that could be a good idea. So it's been a great partnership. And that's kind of how we review our relationship with our growers. It's not, Russell's the famous winemaker, do as we say. It really is, why don't we walk the vineyards together? Why don't we figure out a farming plan, and how do we maximize the potential of this site? So I think this one is 14.9, because it is blazingly hot in Dry Creek where this is grown. And so this is definitely, of the 3 Zinfandels that we bottled in 2018, by far the flashiest. And so this is something that, I even open as that, okay, we finished a meal, but my friends are still at my house, so we still want to drink something. So in lieu of cocktails, because we're in Napa, this is something that doesn't really need anything else to be enjoyed. So it can either be a reception wine, everyone's here, it's great. Before we sit down to eat, everyone gets a big splash of big fun Zinfandel, or it can be post-dinner. Not to say it overpowers it all, but it's been great.
And a lot of people on in the session tonight probably already know this, but this is the kind of diamond in the rough, where at this, don't let the price point fool you. This is what I call a head turner. This is one where you bring it to a dinner party because you want to bring a bottle and show up with something, and it gets poured at the table, and people are like, whoa, what is that? to me what this Dry Creek Zinfandel is.
So, our highly competitive nature, it's always fun in Napa socially. The first bottle that's consumed is the winner of the night, because everyone's in the wine business. We all want to taste everything. But the first bottle that's empty, that's when you know you brought something that people wanted to go back and revisit and got to, like you said, turn some heads. And people ask, like, who brought this? Who made this? What's the story? It's fun to, again, be next to a bunch of $85, $95 Zins that are out in the market today and come in and have some fun.
Can you comment on the Corte Ranch Zin?
Yes. So that's the vineyard in St. Helena. Again, 100-year-old dry farm, head pruned Zinfandel. That is our most elegant Zinfandel of the three. And so for me, that is what I would take to a white tablecloth dinner, because it plays with so many different types of food. Any of your beefy kind of modern Pinot Noir lovers, this is a Zin you will love. So it has a gracefulness that's kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum of the Dry Creek.
And again, the name of that's the Corte Zin.
Correct. And that's, and all these things, and I'll tell you a quick side story. So we have interns that come in every harvest, and we all sit down, and how we kind of get used to their work ethic and how they're going to respond and how talented they are is we send them on vineyard sampling trips. And they all come back and they all have their bags full of grapes, and we squish them, figure out the sugar and acid. So something like Corte, so it's owned by the Paggenderm family, but it's called Corte Ranch. So we'll have two interns coming back from the same vineyard. So that happens with Dry Creek. Oh, I went to the Ramazzotis this morning. Oh, I was at Carreras. I was up in Dry Creek. I was like, you all went to the same vineyard. Do you understand that? Like, we have to figure out what are we going to call it for the next 3 months? And so that's kind of where we have to figure out how we internally reference all of these vineyards, and that's kind of the fun part.
Well, and what's amazing about this one is, as the most refined and sort of elegant and nuanced of the Zins that you make, this one is also $45, the Corte Ranch Zin.
And I would say the most classic is the Morosoli Vineyard Zinfandel, and I think that is absolute textbook what people expect of old Vine Zinfandel, and kind of the Three Bears reference. It's right in the middle. Yeah, it's not as flashy as Dry Creek, but it's got a little broader shoulders than Corte, and so that's kind of where we love having all three in the portfolio, really to show how that works.
Dry Creek more fruit forward.
Yes,
it's in.
Yeah, out of our portfolio, I mean, it's still got a great core of tertiary flavors, but it definitely is going to have that big fruit pop. But I put that in kind of air quotes. That's within our world of winemaking, not in the world of Zinfandel, because we're definitely not on the full blown motor oil, over the top jamminess. It's just not our style.
Right.
So I would say, compared to our the Zap tasting, I'll see you in January, we would be middle of the road on the fruit pop compared to a lot of our neighbors.
So speaking of head turning wines, and I would count this one among them as well. When I go back in time to many moons ago, 20 something years, and I had a friend who worked in Northern California in the wine industry, and I said, I didn't know anything about wine. I said, just if there's a case of something good, send it. She said, send me a check for $110. $100, we'll do a case. And then $10 at the time, ground transport from California to New York on a case of wine was, I think, $10 or $12. And so she sent me this case of wine. I didn't know the wine, the label, the winery at all. And at the time I was single, and I would occasionally get invited to go to somebody's house for dinner. I'd bring a bottle, and it wasn't just a head turner. It blew people away. Like, the conversation would stop when that bottle got opened, and people were like, wait a minute, what is that? And it was a case, before Caymus was even a household name, it was a case of Caymus Zinfandel. Mm-hmm. And it was extraordinary. And it was literally $100 for a case at the time. So it just goes to show you that diamond in the rough, concept is something super interesting. And for me, is what got me interested in wine in the first place.
Well, I think for us, that's kind of where Elyse is a brand. We've heard from countless people that have visited in the last 3 years of this was the first tasting room I ever visited. This was the first time I ever spent, more than $5 on a bottle of wine 20 years ago. And, it was $18 or whatever it might've been. Right. And I think we respect that. I think if we would have come in 3 years ago and completely just gutted the ethos of Elyse and all of a sudden made a bunch of $200 wines, I don't think people would be very friendly. And so we kind of have other outlets to explore those styles and price points. And that's where we really wanted to kind of keep as much as we possibly can Elyse in its kind of in its lane. And I think a lot of people have really enjoyed that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that kind of goes to the Morosoli Cabernet. It's the most expensive wine ever sold under the Elyse portfolio. And that's been their flagship since inception. And so the very first wines were made from the Morosoli vineyard when the brand was launched. So it's the only vineyard that's been in the portfolio every vintage of Elyse history. So, this was the absolute first meeting that we wanted to make sure that went well with Gary and his son, Chris Morosoli, to make sure we could continue kind of this legacy and work with them. So we've now, as of 2020, doubled our acreage within Morosoli. So we're, really will remain one of our anchor bottlings. So this is a wine that we blended but did not ferment. And so that'll be kind of coming out. So this was in barrel for 22 months. And, one of the first things that we bottled right when we got the keys to the winery.
Well, and yes, literally, yeah. So this was still aging when you took over.
Correct. And so it was we got a little bit of our fingerprints on this vintage, but we really love working with the vineyard and the family. So this is 95% cab. There's a tiny, as we call it, a whisper of Merlot. And that was just to round out some hard edges that were there. And we've had a lot of fun kind of exploring this vineyard. It's Cabernet planted in the early 80s, kind of planted around the 100-plus-year-old block of Zinfandel. And then they just developed a new 5-acre parcel that we're now starting as of 2020 to play with. So there's some young vine on the property. So it's great to be able to kind of take a decent sized ranch and start to, for us, carve it up into smaller lots just to see the different personalities within the vineyard.
This is obviously a wine that's got more of that classic Napa Cabernet Sauvignon refinement to it. One question in the chat is about when I mentioned Caymus. Eddie has said, the Caymus is often very high in kind of the brix level, which is the residual sugar in the grapes when they're harvested, when they're picked. What's Elyse's approach to the brix level and sugar?
I'm going to give you a wishy-washy answer. It's site specific. Mm-hmm. We have certain sites, and there's really a balance between sugar and acid. So we have certain vineyards we know that can carry a slightly higher brix level and not seem hot or not really having the alcohol come through. But we typically shoot for 25, 26 brix, which is on the medium to high level. I think some of the more flashier wines that Eddie might be talking about, they're picking at 31 to 33 brix, which is getting into almost fortified levels. So there's some different philosophies, and we're kind of one to say don't throw stones in glass houses. We definitely have some vineyards that we push, and one of the things that I look at, is it a standalone wine, or is it a component that we know we're going to blend in X? Yep. So one that we push aggressively would be Cabernet Franc. The pyrazines or the bell pepper quality of Cabernet Franc, we try to avoid like the plague. And so knowing that we're only going to have 2% Cabernet Franc maybe blended into a wine, we may pick that obnoxiously ripe, but it gets blended away at only 2% of the final wine. So that's kind of, sometimes you have to look at the macro to understand why some of our micro decisions might be a little weird. And we sometimes do it on Chardonnay. We'll pick some rows out of like the Ritchie vineyard. We'll pick 3 or 4 rows every year, almost with the chemistry of sparkling wine, just to have something with super, super racy acidity to blend into other Chardonnays. So that way, we kind of have that big spice rack that we can blend back with later.
So on these last 2 wines, with the Dry Creek Zinfandel and the Elyse Winery Cabernet Sauvignon, what are your favorite food pairings for each of those 2?
Well, Dry Creek, I think that Zinfandel, like I said, I just drink by itself. I really don't worry about food with that wine. I love to just, when you have that situation, watching a football game, watching hanging out with some friends in the backyard. That one I don't really worry about. Charcuterie board, easy. Just something you don't have to think about. Morosoli Cab, classic, absolute perfect steakhouse companion. That just loves a New York strip with charred medium rare for me. It's just one of those wines with a few years of age on it. We've kind of kept the tradition where this wine, 2016's current release by design, and that was always 2 years in barrel, 3 years at the warehouse, then go to market. And so we're trying to keep that, keep that tradition alive. So it'll be the latest release we have, and it's kind of ready to go when we put it to market. Which, it's hard to hold on. We have people wanting the new ones, and it's kind of, we'll get there next spring. How about that?
This has been so great, Josh, and I want to thank you. My only regret is that I'm still looking at the door waiting for the UPS guy to bring my Elyse these 4 wines.
Well, you have a care package coming, so now you can call me and tell me if I was right or wrong about everything I said.
Exactly.
Well, I appreciate you having me.
It's great. This is so much fun. We really appreciate it. And thank you everybody for tuning in. We will be back. We're taking a little bit of a break around the 4th of July, and we'll be back in the second week of July. We are doing a really cool wine and cheese pairing with a super good winery from the North Fork of Long Island, Peconic Bay Winery. So anyway, thank you everybody. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
Well, travel safe.
Wednesday.
I know you're in the middle of the country traveling around, so safe travels. And
all right.
we'll see you very soon. I'll let you know what I pair the wines with.
Perfect. Thank you.
Right.
Have a great night.
Thank you.